Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today we're joined by dietitian and just person extraordinaire, Renee McGregor. She, as you know before, I've mentioned her quite a few times, and also on my Instagram, that she's really helped me, put it that way. And now we're, I'd say, pretty good friends. You know, through struggles, make you stronger. However, sadly, we're not going to talk about our great friendship, but we are going to talk about something that's obviously very close to my heart, and we have the science and information behind it, is pretty much, I guess you'd say, body image. I guess it'd be body image and body size.
I guess so, maybe body composition.
There we go, see, I told you, she knows everything. So essentially, one thing that keeps blowing my mind, and also something especially when I was, I guess, recovering not only from my eating disorder, but also, I guess, the side effects of RED-S, relative energy deficiency in sport. Yes. Nailed it. Is how I look like as an athlete, and the process of how my body changed through one, obviously, when I was severely underweight from eating disorder, but then obviously to get healthy, this big transition in body composition to what I am now. And I'd say, like, okay, yes, I'm not the most uber lean athlete, not the smallest athlete, but it's very, very different to how I was. And essentially I asked Renee, I've often asked her why, I don't understand, I'm eating more yet I'm leaner, or oh, I've got abs now, or whatever. Growing boobs, you name it. I've spoken to Renee about it. So I'd like to ask her a few questions about why this is happening, the science behind it, and something I think that quite a lot of you guys would relate to, and also it's not really talked about enough when we see athletes' body types changing, or wondering why something might not be happening to you, or you're training really hard yet you're putting on weight. That's like, wow, how is that happening? Like, or eating more and you're leaning up. That also blows my mind. So yeah, so we're gonna talk to the genius behind it. So Renee, first up, can you just quickly explain what RED-S is, I guess?
Sure. So, you did nail it. It is relative energy deficiency in sport. And what that means is that there's basically not enough energy in the body relative to the amount of work you're doing. And the amount of work you're doing is obviously training, but also general movement. So what happens is the amount of fuel that you're taking in doesn't cover the amount of training you're doing, the general movement, and your biological function, where biological function is fundamentally everything that's going on within the body, from your brain to your reproductive system, to your cardiovascular system, to your immune health, to your bone health. So the human body is actually quite expensive and needs quite a lot of energy. It's an incredible feat of engineering, and is very, very good at being resistant and sustaining periods of starvation. But when it's in prolonged periods of starvation, it tends to go into these compensatory behaviours. So what RED-S is when the body goes into these compensatory behaviours. So energy is directed towards your training and your movement, but that means there's not enough energy available for biological function. So things like your periods might stop if you're female. In males, you may see a decline in your morning erectile function. You might start to notice more injuries, or recurrent injuries as well, and that's not always just bone stress. I think there's this misconception that you only have RED-S if you have a stress fracture, and actually you can have like recurrent tendon issues, ligament issues. You may find that you're not progressing, so you're putting all this training in, but you're just not progressing, you're not seeing the results you'd expect to see, both from a performance point of view, but also from a body composition point of view. And this is because your body is basically down-regulating metabolism to preserve energy and keep you safe.
Is that also why potentially your fat percentage could increase as well? Yeah. Because it's trying to sort of preserve energy, really?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that it's preserving energy, so and there's then not enough energy to actually put down lean muscle mass. But the other thing is also, if you're in this kind of highly stressed out state, that isn't, your body is stressed because you're physically putting it under stress through training, but you're also physically putting it under stress through underfueling, then you have very high cortisol levels, and cortisol is your stress hormone, which actually interferes with your metabolism of both fat and carbohydrate, and encourages you to hold more fat, particularly around your middle.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Interesting you say that. I picked up on I got sent this podcast to listen to about low carb diets, right? And it's a top coach actually in the triathlon world, so quite relevant to you guys. And he said, or she said, we'll be open, that when you see an age grouper running around looking like they haven't done their 20 hours of training a week, it's because actually they're eating too many carbs, which actually, would you say the opposite? Actually, not the opposite necessarily, it's they're in a stress state. They haven't leaned up because they haven't got the energy to lean up. It's not it's not about technically what they're eating. Well, it is, but it's not about the carbohydrates solely.
I think the issue is that carbohydrates had such a bad press for so many years, and particularly in endurance sport. And we seem to be moving away from it from the running world, but we're not moving away from it in the triathlon world. But there was this phenomenon known as basically training low.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea being that you do certain sessions, particularly endurance sessions, in a carb depleted state. And that would then help you to become fat adapted. And that means that when you're out on the bike or when you're doing triathlon, and you particularly when you start doing like the longer distance type stuff, you can start using more fat for fuel, so you're not just reliant on carbohydrate. But as often happens, the science gets taken on board by people who don't understand it, who don't critically appraise papers, who don't really read the paper properly, and the expertise within the studies gets diluted down. And so this then suddenly became this phenomenon of fat adaptation, being that you just basically don't have carbs at all in your diet. Now, when you look at the real information on training low, and there is some evidence to suggest that training low can be useful in adapting the body to use more fat for fuel, but these sessions need to be done in what's called the first ventriculatory phase, which is basically working at an L2 in cycling or a 60% VO2 max in running. And they should be no longer than 60 minutes, and they should really not be done any more than twice a week. The problem is very few people can actually stick to that and do that, because it's actually very, very hard. If you think about some of your L2 endurance rides, they'll probably be outside, quite hilly.
Yeah,
so you're not
coming out of it.
Exactly. So you're not always thinking, and it's really difficult to maintain that potential phase that you need to be in. But the other thing about the training low was, although you might do that session in a carb depleted state, the idea is that as soon as you finish, you actually then take on the carbs you need, and you take on the carbs you need for that entire day throughout the rest of that day. So
okay, interesting.
I think what's interesting is that the science has been misinterpreted into this let's all go low carb, high fat. And in fact, we know, because there's been now numerous studies because I think fundamentally scientists want this to be true, because it would encourage better performances. It gives us something quite cool to work with, but the reality is it doesn't work, because what we've seen is that if you stay low carb chronically for generally more than 3 weeks, fundamentally what starts to happen is you become less economical, so you actually start using more oxygen per minute of exercise. You also lose the ability to use you use the ability to use glucose more effectively and efficiently during your exercise.
So that means, like, if I was using race fuel, actually I've now become less efficient at using my race fuel.
And fundamentally, and most importantly, you can't maintain the high pace that you want to maintain. So there will be very, very few scenarios where low carb, high fat might work. But the one scenario where it should never be used is with females, because we know there's a very, very strong link between carbohydrate availability and one of our thyroid hormones, which is T3. And when T3 is low in our body, the hypothalamus in the brain detects that this is low, and that means that it starts to kind of go, okay, well, there's not enough energy here for this, and it shuts down your endocrine function.
Interesting. And then it leaves obviously loss of period, blah, 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 blah. That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
And it's directly linked to carbohydrate availability. So you can be having enough energy,
but the carbs is
carb is really important.
All the carbs before marbs, guys. See, it's true. No, that's interesting, and that's good. Like, good to hear it that way. Obviously, I knew the sort of basics of it, but to hear it again, as I said, I've listened to too many times, is actually really interesting. On what you've just said, is one thing that always, I guess, comes back to me, especially, I guess, on the process of, I guess, my recovery and then building as an athlete and then training. Even recently, like my coach said, at Fat Max, I'm still burning 40 grams of carbs now, obviously, which obviously no one talks about, but I am. It's like you still got to fuel even when we're doing Fat Max sessions. But it's how and why, despite, I guess, quite similar training loads over the years, is how has my body, one, to get back healthy, to regain my period, one, I always had to eat oats. That's when I started seeing you. We introduced a lot more carbohydrates, one of the biggest things we introduced. But also I had to be quite a lot heavier. And if you look at my body comp, you wouldn't necessarily, or look at what I looked like, you'd be like, doesn't really look that toned like as an athlete. Yet coming all full circle, what, I think it's 8 years I've known you, 7 years on. It's probably
Yeah, it's been quite a long time now.
Now to eating a lot more carbohydrates, fueling much more in sessions, much more around sessions, much more calories and carbs in total, more. Yet my body comp has changed. I've lost a lot of weight since 7 years ago without restricting, and my body just is adapting much more. And in, I guess, the photos, you'd say I look a bit leaner. Like, why is this, and why do you, I guess, the hormones and everything take the shape, I guess?
It's quite ironic, isn't it? I find this quite interesting because it's a conversation I have with so many people after I've been working with them for a long time. So I'll try and explain it as best I can. I think with going back to REDs, there are two types of REDs. There is intentional REDs and unintentional REDs. Unintentional REDs is when you fundamentally just don't understand how much fuel you need, and actually probably fairly quickly you'll pick up on the fact that you're not progressing, you're not adapting, and you're not recovering very well. So ideally you'd go and get some help, and you'd be given some interventions, and actually you should be back on track very quickly. And I've had quite a few athletes like that literally within 6 weeks they feel amazing, they feel great, and it's all good. Intentional REDs or REDs is a little bit more complicated, and it's probably
irrational, probably.
I guess it's where you came from, in the sense that it does generally come from an eating disorder, disordered eating background, and again, this is like, there's a bit of a spectrum, right? Because so disordered eating, I mean, we could say quite a lot of athletes will have disordered eating because they may feel they have to eat in a certain way to be athletic because of what we see and hear on social media all the time. Whereas an eating disorder, really the big difference is that eating disorder then starts to have much more biological consequences, but also fundamentally there are certain ways in which you diagnose, there's certain criteria that you diagnose by. So, but all in all, whichever one you're in, there's a lot of anxiety around food and body image and generally training, particularly in athletes. So with intentional REDs, you're intentionally reducing your energy intake, like you were, in terms of keeping your carbs low, and or training excessively. And some of that might be because actually you're just following your plan, and your coach has no clue about what's going on for you personally. And particularly when you're doing a lot of high intensity training. And I think this is one of the things where with triathlon it's so complicated, because with running you might do 2, maybe 3 hard sessions a week, and the rest of the time you just be doing easy running. Whereas with triathlon you're generally doing at least 1 hard session a day, and then the other session in the day maybe a bit easier. So it's a bit more complicated, and when we're doing these high intensity training, our carbohydrate requirements go up even higher. So fundamentally, if you are an individual that is intentionally reducing your energy intake, and particularly your carbohydrate intake, you put yourself in this position where your body just can't work for you. And that is what is going on. Your body can't work for you. And because your metabolic rate is low, sometimes people will even find they may put weight on. Yeah, no, 100% I did, definitely. So when it comes to your period, it's an interesting one. So estrogen is a steroid hormone like testosterone, and we know that testosterone is banned because it fundamentally enhances performance. Now, women do have testosterone, but we have it in much smaller quantities. But if our estrogen levels are low, then our testosterone levels will also be low. So everything's low. Everything's low. And our growth hormone is also low, which is another important hormone for performance. And what people don't realise is, and this is like fundamentally one of my biggest kind of challenges within my job, is if you've not had a period for quite a long time, like 2-3 years plus, it's not going to return straight away in 3 months, no matter what you do, okay? Because all that time you've not had a period, your nervous system has been put under stress, and there'll be layer upon layer upon layer of stress, particularly if you're carrying on training. And it takes a long time before the body fully appreciates that there is no longer stress in the system. So there's no threat to the system. But we know from studies, and this is not from sports science studies, this is actually from clinical studies in people with eating disorders, we know that from a female point of view, getting your period back is a physical marker that you're at your right set point, but it is a physical marker. It's not, doesn't mean that you're psychologically well. And you know, we both know that getting your period back is an indicator that your body has maybe got enough energy now, but it's not necessarily an indicator that you're fully well and comfortable with it. However, what we know from that physical side is that actually if you can maintain your periods for a year, and it does seem to be a year, you do need 12 consecutive cycles, then the body starts to fully appreciate that the threat has disappeared, and it's only really at that point that it will start to respond and adapt for you, which is why it's taken you so long, because it's not that you've been doing anything wrong, it's just the fact that your body has taken that long to appreciate that, okay, finally I've got enough energy, I can now use all these signals from her training, I've got enough fuel to fundamentally translate those signals into adaptation. And that's what people don't realise, is that, you know, this whole mentality of, you know, move more, eat less doesn't work, because the human body is hardwired to want to be in energy balance, and it actually prefers to be in a positive energy balance rather than even...
Because it's safer, isn't it?
Yeah. And so you fundamentally, what the message should be is move more, eat more, which is what you do now, which is why you're starting to see the progression, and you're not getting injured, you know, because you're doing all the right things. But it does take time for the body to fully appreciate it. And I think this is a stumbling block, because people want an instant fix. We live in a world where people want instant gratification, and the human body doesn't work that way.
But you can also instantly see someone else. You're like, why don't I look like that? Or they've got their period back, they look great. Or they have like just everything, and actually we're all very different.
We are all different, and I think that's something to point out, is that some women will need to possibly overshoot, if you want to use that term, for their period to come back, and some women won't. And I don't know the reasoning behind that. It seems to be like a genetic set point type thing. Now, we know from a set point that the set point weight theory is a thing, and it is a big range. So probably, actually, even though the weight will be different now to what it was when you got your period back, you're probably still within your range. It's just that when you got your period back, you would have been at the top of the range, and now you're at the bottom of the range.
That's interesting.
And your body will now work really hard to maintain you here.
Yeah, no, like I've been here for 6 months, really happily, and like got here completely naturally without even doing anything, and then you're like, what? Did the scales broken? Like, no, but whatever I do now, it stays. But like, even after off season, it stayed. Even after more training, it's pretty much stayed, and everything seems to be going okay. So
I guess that the thing that I'm always trying to teach people is you have to trust the process, and you have to learn to trust your body. It does know what it's doing for you, and it has a place it wants you to be. The difficulty is that sometimes that place it wants to be might not be the ideal you have in your head. And that is what takes quite a lot of work.
And especially in like the sport, everyone's got an opinion on what athletes look like or what you should look like as an athlete. And that's one thing, to be honest, I do quite like about triathlon. There are so many different body types, especially as females, because we have 3 sports. They all pretty much contradict each other, and yet so you come out pretty much in the body type that if you fuel correctly, do the training correctly, you will look how you need to look, and it might not be perfect for you, but actually it's perfect for performance.
And I think that's it. That's the most important thing to take away, is that if you fuel your body correctly and you're doing the training that you need to do, your body will use that information, and the end result, the outcome will be the body type you need to be to do your performance.
Yeah. No, you taught me that anyway, but it is you've got to trust it, and now I'm a big believer in that, and whatever people say I'll do, it's true, right? And you've got to stick to Bosco, what are you doing? We've got a dog down here if you can't see.
Putting his hand up.
Question. So yeah, this is Bosco was here. Come on, wake up. Obviously we'll bored him, he's fallen asleep. Anyway, thank you so much, Renee, for joining. How can people get hold of you or follow if they want to hear more, if they can just really relate to this?
So my Instagram handle is r_McGregor. Also, my latest book, More Fuel You, is probably a really good one for
It's a very good book. I've read it. But I'll put all the information in the comments below, so check it out as you wish to. And of course, if you have any questions or any comments about this, I can answer from a personal point of view, but definitely direct them at Renee for the more professional point of view, and she runs a clinic as well.
Yes,
so she's available. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, make sure big thumbs up. as I said in comments, hit them below, and subscribe if you want to see more. Bye, take care, fuel well.
Are you going to let me in?
Welcome to Bosco's new YouTube channel.